Okay, hello. My name's Andrew Bosson. I'm a lecturer in the School of Languages at Swansea University, and today I'm talking to Thom Markham, who's been here working with us on problem-based learning. So thank you very much for coming, Thom.
My pleasure. Thank you, Andrew.
It's you've given us two great sessions so far, and you've worked with some of our other teams. So I've just got some questions about your presentation. So firstly, one of the first things you said yesterday was that your PhD is in psychology rather than education. And I wondered, you mentioned that psychology has a lot to tell us about teaching and learning. So I wonder if you could give us some insights.
Well, from my standpoint, I recognized some time ago that we have sufficient curriculum and sufficient teaching methods. We have plenty of materials that focus on what the teacher should do, but we have very little information on how students should behave and how they should perform. And one of the things I realized is that actually industry has done quite a good job over the last 20 or 30 years in being able to figure out what makes people perform and motivates them, engages them, helps them go to a next level of performance. And I thought it was time to import those kinds of methods into education so that we can focus on the student side of the equation.
Yeah, I mean, that's fantastic. And I think that's a lovely approach to take. And you were here specifically to talk about problem-based learning, project-based learning. And what insights, perhaps, does psychology have to give us about why project-based learning is effective?
Well, project-based learning, as you know, is based a lot on student autonomy. It's based on the idea that students need to take initiative. And, of course, the teacher is helping to organize that experience for them, but it does depend a lot on students taking responsibility for their own learning, which is one of the objectives we're trying to get to. And so project-based learning requires that. And so teachers need to practice some of these psychological techniques, if you will, in order to help students perform and have the kinds of behaviors that they're trying to get to. Otherwise, if you do that, the students remain passive. And if they remain passive, projects don't work very well.
Okay, great. And perhaps thinking about, what was your route into project-based learning?
Well, I was a teacher in the 90s, and I was fortunate enough to be in a school where projects were not only allowed but encouraged, and was in a situation in my school at 11th and 12th grade level in which we were able to form an academy and focus almost exclusively on doing projects. And so that's where I learned about project-based learning and learned about the benefits of it, I would say, because I saw such great results from the students in terms of their enthusiasm, in terms of their learning, their excitement, and interestingly, really in terms of how they felt about their high school experience. In my town, I will run into my students occasionally from years ago now, and they will look back. I ran into a young woman the other day, not too long ago. She must be 27, 28 years old now. And instead of looking back on her high school experiences, oh, I went to high school, she said, that was the most wonderful experience. It was just great there. And so isn't it nice to have that kind of memory of your high school experience where you felt it was beneficial to you? That's what I saw with project-based learning. So that's why I became a convert.
I mean, that sounds fantastic. And one of the things you talked about a lot in the sessions was having high expectations of your learners and enjoying being with them. So I wondered perhaps if you could tell us about the benefits of having these expectations and, perhaps pushing the learners to their potential. The two, expectations and liking your students, actually these days go hand in hand, I think. For one thing, what we know from the science of the brain and what you might call the science of relationships is that when people feel connected, cared for, mentoring takes place. When mentoring takes place, performance goes up. And so in a way, a caring relationship or a mentor relationship between an adult and student in which the adult really takes an interest in the student, a personal interest, actually results in higher performance. And along with that, it also opens up what I call a channel of trust between the adult mentor and the student. So the mentor can really speak quite frankly about expectations and how that student can improve. And when you have a good relationship, something interesting happens. Instead of the student feeling criticized, they feel supported, and their performance goes up. And we learn to see students not as students or learners, but as people.
Exactly. So
their own expectations, their own likes, dislikes, and as a rounded person.
Yeah, and I might say also that kind of philosophy is being borne out by brain science, in which the brain reacts very well to positive emotions. Positive emotions tend to push brain activity towards the frontal lobes, the areas of creativity and critical thinking and planning and execution, and away from the rear part of the brain, the fear and or flight kind of region, where your thinking is really not quite as good. And I have a feeling that our school system puts a lot of students in the fight or flight mode, and is not the most productive from the terms of performance.
Yeah, I think for a lot of students, I've got a 10-year-old son who's in the education system, and in some ways education is something that's done to him. It's not something which is necessarily he's empowered by, and I think perhaps problem-based learning can empower students. It changes the power relation dynamics within the classroom.
Well, it does recognize their differences and acknowledge their differences, and instead of trying to subdue those differences in the name of one educational result called a test, it does allow students to express different aspects of themselves and what you might call different aspects of their intelligence. And so they have a chance to show what they can do across a wide variety of behaviors, which then is motivating in itself because they feel like they're being honored and respected as individuals, and that's when you really get best performance.
And then this is interesting, you talked about testing, and again in the Turkish context, testing and assessment are very, very important factors, and it's really the test which seems to be, or the final achievement test, which is the main focus. And often we start with the test and then work backwards to say, well, how can we get the learners through the test?
Can we prepare them for the test?
Yeah, whereas problem-based learning tends, I think your approach, you're suggesting that problem-based learning will improve people, and that improvement would then help them to pass the test.
Yeah, one of the things with problem-based learning is that you are trying to help them learn to solve problems, think critically, collaborate, be creative, so for some of these 21st century skills we talk about. But we're also using the process in order to master knowledge and learn content. So that becomes part of the process also. So there's nothing in a way that I would object to about a test unless it's the sole means of assessing performance. So in project-based learning, a test becomes one of the assessment tools you use. But in the other case, you're looking at their growth in terms of skills as individuals. And their habits of mind, the way they approach learning, and again, whether they're becoming autonomous, lifelong learners, or whether they remain passive as the system tends to teach them.
Yeah, that's great. I'd just like to move the subject a little bit now. So you've given us two great talks over the past 2 days, and there's a great amount to think about. And people have got concerns, people have got ideas, and there's lots of ideas fermenting. And you said this idea of a period of confusion, which is a nice idea, and it can be a creative time as well. And there's an idea of transformation. If you're going to transform yourself, transform your ideas, you need to throw yourself out of your system, out of its normal order to come back into
disruptive.
Yeah, so you have disruptive innovation and these ideas, and these are things that if we do introduce problem-based learning, our students will feel as well. They'll be going through the same process.
Right.
So I'm just wondering what we can learn about our students' experience from our own experience with perhaps implementing people.
Well, I think the first thing that we can learn is to be comfortable with the confusion. So the times we live in are not exactly clear. How we should move forward as educators into redesigning education is not exactly clear. We certainly have clues, and we have ideas, and we have some direction, but we ourselves actually are in a state of confusion. And I think it's good to learn to be comfortable with that and realize that's part of the process of creating something new, of transforming. And I think when you put students in a project and you present a complex challenge or a complex problem they're grappling with, there's going to be inevitable confusion, particularly at the beginning. This is the normal state of affairs when you're trying to solve a complex problem. And I think it's really good experience for them to have to stay with that confusion, not be frustrated, and to understand that that's really part of the process. And I think if you can teach them that so they can be patient with it, then you actually have done a good job of preparing them for the world they're going into.
Yeah, and if we have, as teachers, have been through that process ourselves in creating the framework for problem-based learning for our learners, we understand that we're in confusion, but we're going to get to a point where we've got something usable, workable, and it's come through cooperation, collaboration.
I remember one exercise, I was working team teaching with 2 other teachers, and we actually one time had a circle of all the students around us, with the 3 of us in the middle and 3 chairs talking about the initial stages of planning a project, so they could see our level of confusion. It was very effective.
Yeah, and finally, I'd just like to get onto the idea of the fact that we're saying that learning, lifelong learning or working is no longer a solitary practice, maybe unless you're an author or something, but again, even then you'll be working with editors or things, but it's about collaboration, it's about distributed intelligence, and the role technology plays in this, that the students have technological devices, but really it's an attitude to information and access to information and sharing information, and what perhaps role that plays in, or can play in project-based learning.
Well, I think one role it plays is it can be somewhat of a negative influence, in the sense that people can mistake technology for projects.
Yes.
Anytime they're on a device or looking on the internet or somehow using a tablet or something to communicate, that's mistaken for a project. And that's mistaking the device for the information. So a project is really a well-organized way to handle information, learn through it, sift it, apply it, however you're doing that. The device is secondary. This is just ways to get information to us, and we have a lot of ways to do that these days, but that's not the core of what you're trying to do. The core is taking information, using it to solve a problem. That's what you're trying to do.
And I think one of the things you stressed was the importance of critical thinking and being able to sift the information for reliable information and to use it in a constructive way.
Right, absolutely. It's all about solving problems. At the core of every project is a really, what I call, good, complex problem that has no single answer to it. And the purpose, of course, is to have students examine the problem, come up with the best solution they can, and show the evidence for their thinking.
Okay, that's great. I think that's a great place to leave it, so thank you very much.
All right, thanks so much, Andrew. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.